The iron collar around her neck caught the winter sun like a brand. Sarah Mitchell stood on the auction block in front of the Billings Courthouse, Montana Territory, her 3 children huddled at her feet, and waited for someone to buy what was left of her life. December 1878. The coldest winter in 20 years. The kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground, that made horses refuse to leave the barn, that killed the old and the weak without mercy. And here she stood, exposed to it all, while the good people of Billings watched and did nothing. The collar was narrow but heavy, blackened iron with a small padlock at the back. Howard Blackwell had put it on her 3 days ago in front of the land office after she told him she could not pay, after she begged for more time, after she offered everything she had except her children. He had smiled when he locked it, smiled like a man who had just acquired something valuable. Now she stood 15 feet above the street on a wooden platform hastily constructed for this purpose, this spectacle, this warning to anyone else who thought they could escape their debts to Howard Blackwell. Her hands were bound in front of her with rope, not tight enough to cut, but tight enough to remind her. Grace Samuel and Lily pressed against her legs, their faces buried in her worn skirt. Grace was 12, old enough to understand everything, old enough to feel the shame burning through her like fever. Her jaw was clenched so hard Sarah could see the muscles working beneath the skin. Samuel was 8 and had not spoken since his father died 8 months ago in the mine collapse outside town. He stared at nothing with eyes that had forgotten how to cry. Lily was 4. She did not understand why Mama was wearing the bad necklace or why all these people were looking at them. She only knew she was cold and wanted to go home. Except they had no home. Blackwell stood to the left of the platform in his fine wool coat and a beaver hat, hands clasped behind his back, like a preacher at a funeral. He was 52 years old, owned half the buildings in Billings and most of the land for 20 miles in every direction. He had made his fortune buying up debts and foreclosing on dreams. Men feared him. Women crossed the street to avoid him. And no one, not one person in this crowd of 40 or 50 souls, would meet Sarah's eyes. Marshal Frank Dixon stood beside Blackwell Thumbs, hooked in his gun belt, looking bored. Dixon was paid $30 a month by the town and another $50 by Blackwell to look the other way when necessary. Today was apparently necessary. Blackwell cleared his throat. The crowd quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily in the frozen air, "we are here today to resolve a matter of debt. Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, widow of Robert Mitchell, owes me the sum of $287, borrowed at 6% interest to purchase equipment for her late husband's mining claim. Equipment which, I might add, is now buried under 10,000 tons of rock, along with Mr. Mitchell himself." Someone in the crowd coughed. A woman turned away. "Mrs. Mitchell has defaulted on 3 payments, Blackwell continued. "Under territorial law and the terms of our contract, her debt has now been converted to a labor agreement. She and her children will work off what is owed at a rate of 25 cents per day. That comes to approximately 3 years of service." 3 years. Sarah felt Grace stiffen against her leg. "However," Blackwell said, and now his smile widened, "I am a reasonable man. If anyone here wishes to purchase Mrs. Mitchell's contract, they may do so by paying the full amount owed plus 10% for my trouble. That would be $316. Cash only." Silence. The wind blew down the street, rattling shutters and stirring up small tornadoes of snow. Someone's horse stamped and blew steam. No one spoke. $316, more money than most people in Billings saw in a year, more money than existed in most homes. An impossible sum. Blackwell waited. 30 seconds. A minute. His smile never faltered. "Very well, then," he said at last. "Mrs. Mitchell and her children will accompany me to my ranch where they will begin their service. Marshal Dixon has witnessed and approved all documents. This is legal and binding under territorial law. Does anyone have any objections?" No one moved. Sarah closed her eyes. 3 years. By then Grace would be 15, Samuel 11, Lily 7, if they survived. If Blackwell kept his word, if he did not find ways to add to the debt, extend the term, keep them forever. Her hands shook inside the rope. Not from cold. From rage so pure and helpless, it felt like poison in her blood. Then a voice cut through the silence. "I have an objection." Every head turned. A man stood at the back of the crowd. Tall, lean, maybe 35 or 40 years old. He wore a sheepskin coat crusted with snow and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was weathered, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth. He had not shaved in days. He looked like a man who had ridden hard and slept rough. He walked forward slowly. The crowd parted for him. His boots crunched in the snow. His right hand hung loose at his side close to the gun on his hip. An old Colt revolver, the grip worn smooth from use. Blackwell's smile tightened. "Mr. Brennan, I did not know you were in town." "I am now," the man said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, the kind of voice that made you lean in to hear it. "And I said I have an objection. This is none of your concern." "I am making it my concern." Blackwell's jaw worked. "The law is on my side." "The law," James Brennan said, "is a tool, and you have used it like a weapon." He stopped 10 feet from the platform and looked up at Sarah. Their eyes met. His were gray, the color of winter storms. "Ma'am, do you want to go with him?" Sarah could not speak. Her throat was too tight. She shook her head once. Jim nodded. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. Heavy, the kind banks used for large transactions. He tossed it onto the wooden table where Dixon had spread the contract papers. The pouch landed with a solid thunk. Coins shifted inside. "Count it," Jim said. $300. Not $316 because I am not paying your trouble fee, Blackwell. I am paying her debt. Nothing more. Blackwell did not move. His face had gone very still. "You cannot afford $300. I just did. That is 2 years of savings for a man with your income. It is my money. I will spend it as I choose." "Why?" Blackwell's voice rose slightly. "Why would you bankrupt yourself for a woman you do not even know?" Jim looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was even quieter than before. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said. "And I remember what that felt like." He turned to Dixon. "Marshal, I believe you have a job to do. The debt is paid. Release her." Dixon glanced at Blackwell. Blackwell's face was red now, mottled with anger, but he nodded once, sharp and quick. Dixon climbed onto the platform. He unlocked Sarah's hands first, then reached for the collar. The key turned. The lock clicked. The collar fell away and Dixon caught it before it hit the ground. Sarah's hands flew to her neck. The skin was raw and chafed. She could feel the shape of the iron still pressed into her flesh. "You are free to go, ma'am," Dixon said. He did not sound happy about it. Sarah's knees buckled. Grace caught her. Strong hands for a 12-year-old. Hands that had learned to hold up a family. Jim stepped to the edge of the platform. "Can you walk?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. Her first word in 3 days. "Then come down, all of you." Grace helped her mother down the steps. Samuel followed, still silent, still staring. Lily came last, stumbling on the last step. Jim caught her easily, set her on her feet, then looked down at the collar Dixon still held. "Give it to me," Jim said. Dixon hesitated, then handed it over. Jim walked to where Blackwell stood. The older man watched him approach with narrowed eyes. Jim stopped inches away. He held up the collar so Blackwell could see it clearly. Then he threw it at Blackwell's feet. It hit the snow and sank halfway in. "If I ever see you put one of these on another human being," Jim said softly, "I will kill you. That is not a threat. It is a promise." Blackwell's hand twitched toward his coat pocket. Jim's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, just resting there. "Go ahead," Jim said. "Draw whatever you are reaching for. See what happens." Blackwell's hand stopped. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You have made an enemy today, Brennan." "I had one already." Jim turned his back on him. In the West, that was either supreme confidence or supreme stupidity. With Jim Brennan, Sarah would later learn it was always the former. He walked to where she stood with her children. "My wagon is 2 streets over. Can you make it that far?" "Yes," Sarah said again. Her voice was stronger now. "Good. Follow me." They walked through the crowd. No one spoke. No one congratulated them. No one even looked directly at them. They simply parted and watched them pass these 4 people who had just been bought and freed in the span of 5 minutes. The wagon was old but sturdy, pulled by 2 horses that looked better fed than most people. Jim helped Sarah up to the seat, then lifted Lily into her lap. Grace and Samuel climbed into the back without being told. They had learned not to wait for invitations. Jim untied the horses and climbed up beside Sarah. He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. They left Billings behind, heading east toward the open country where snow covered everything and the wind never stopped. For 10 minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the crunch of snow under the wheels, the breathing of the horses. Then Lily turned in her mother's lap and looked at Jim. "What is your name?" she asked. "James Brennan," he said. "But you can call me Mr. Jim. Are you our papa now?" Sarah's breath caught. Jim glanced at her, then back at the road. "No, little one," he said gently. "I am just someone who is going to help your mama for a while." "Oh." Lily thought about this. "Where are we going?" "To my ranch. It is about 2 hours from here. You will be safe there." "Will the bad man come get us?" Jim's hands tightened slightly on the reins. No, he will not. How do you know? Because I will not let him. Lily nodded, satisfied. She turned back around and snuggled into her mother's chest. Within minutes, she was asleep. Sarah looked at Jim. He stared straight ahead, his profile sharp against the white landscape. She wanted to thank him, wanted to ask him why he had done this, what he wanted in return, what would happen next. But the words would not come. Her throat was still tight, her chest still burning. Finally, she managed 2 words. Thank you. Jim nodded once, but did not look at her. You do not owe me anything, ma'am. Not gratitude, not service, not anything. I paid your debt because it was the right thing to do. When we get to the ranch, you and your children will sleep in the house. I will sleep in the barn. In a few days, when you are rested, we will figure out what comes next. But for now, you are safe. That is all that matters. Sarah felt tears on her face. She did not wipe them away. Grace, sitting in the back, heard every word. She stared at the back of Jim's head with an expression Sarah could not read. Suspicion, maybe, or hope. It was hard to tell with Grace anymore. The land rolled on, white and empty and cold. But ahead, somewhere in that emptiness, was a place called safety, a place where a man with gray eyes and a quiet voice had just spent 2 years of savings to buy their freedom. Sarah did not know what that meant yet, did not know if it was real or if it was just another kind of trap. But for the first time in 8 months, since the day they pulled Robert's body from the collapsed mine, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the western horizon. A small house, weathered gray wood, with a stone chimney from which no smoke rose. A barn larger than the house with good, strong walls. A corral with split rail fencing. Behind it all, the mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. Jim stopped the wagon in front of the house. He climbed down and held up his arms for Lily. Sarah handed her down, then climbed down herself. Grace and Samuel jumped from the back. They stood in the snow, shivering, staring at this place that might be shelter or might be something else entirely. Jim walked to the front door and opened it. He did not go inside. Instead, he stepped back and gestured. It is not much, he said. 2 rooms, a wood stove that works. The roof does not leak. There is a well behind the barn with clean water. Food in the pantry. Not fancy, but enough. Sarah walked forward slowly. She stopped at the threshold and looked inside. A single room with a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stove, shelves, a trunk. Simple, clean, empty. You live here alone? She asked. I do now, Jim said. Something in his voice made her look at him. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes were not. I did not always. Sarah understood. Loss recognized loss. She stepped inside. The house was cold but not frozen. Grace and Samuel followed her. Lily was already exploring, touching things with careful fingers. Where will you sleep? Grace asked Jim, her first word since the courthouse. The barn, he said. It is warm enough. I have done it before. Why? Jim looked at her. Grace stared back, chin lifted, eyes hard, testing him, waiting for the real reason, the hidden price. Because, Jim said slowly, you have been through enough. You need space that is yours. You need a door that locks from the inside. You need to know that when you go to sleep, no one will come through that door unless you open it. You need to feel safe, and you will not feel safe if I am sleeping 10 feet away. Grace's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. What do you want from us? She asked. Nothing. People do not give things for nothing. Some people do, Jim said. Not many, but some. Are you one of them? I am trying to be. Grace studied him for another long moment. Then she turned and walked deeper into the house without another word. Jim looked at Sarah. There is firewood stacked on the north side of the house. Enough for tonight and tomorrow. I will bring more in the morning. There is salt pork and beans in the pantry. Flour, some dried apples. Make whatever you want. It is yours. Mr. Brennan, Sarah began. Jim, he interrupted gently. Just Jim. Jim, she corrected. I do not know how to repay you. Then do not try, he said. Just rest. That is enough. He turned to leave. Sarah reached out and caught his sleeve. He stopped. Why did you do this? She asked. The question Grace had wanted answered. The question that mattered. Jim looked down at her hand on his arm. When he looked back up, his eyes were very tired. 2 years ago, he said quietly, I lost my wife and daughter to scarlet fever, Mary and Emma. Emma was 6. I sat with them for 3 days while they burned up from the inside. I begged God to take me instead. He did not. When they died, I buried them on the hill behind this house. I stood over those graves, and I wanted to die too. I wanted it more than I had ever wanted anything, but I did not have the courage. He paused. Sarah waited. For 2 years, I have been walking around like a dead man, working my land, feeding my animals, going through the motions, but I was not alive. I was just waiting for it to end. And then today I rode into town, and I saw you on that platform with that thing around your neck and your children holding on to you like you were the only real thing left in the world. And I thought, here is a woman who has every reason to quit, every reason to give up. But she has not. She is still fighting, still standing. And I realized that I had spent 2 years feeling sorry for myself, while people like you, people who actually had something to fight for, were drowning. So I did the only thing I could do. I threw you a rope. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. He cleared his throat. That is why, he finished. Not because I am good, because I needed to do something that mattered. You gave me that. So if anyone owes anyone anything, I owe you. Sarah could not speak, could not breathe. She let go of his arm. Jim nodded to her, once tipped his hat and walked toward the barn. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched him go. Behind her, she heard Grace crying, soft, broken sounds, the first tears her daughter had shed since they buried Robert. Samuel came to stand beside his mother. He did not speak, but he took her hand and held it. And inside the house, Lily sang a small tuneless song as she explored her new home. The sun set. The sky turned from blue to purple to black. Stars emerged hard and bright and cold. In the barn, a single lantern glowed. Sarah closed the door. For the first time in 3 days, she locked it from the inside. Then she sat on the bed and cried until there was nothing left. Morning came with the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Sarah woke to find sunlight streaming through the single window, pale and cold. For a moment she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the softness of the mattress beneath her, heard Lily's steady breathing beside her, saw Grace and Samuel curled together on blankets near the stove. Memory returned. The auction block. The collar. The man with gray eyes who had bought their freedom and asked for nothing in return. She sat up slowly. Her neck ached where the iron had pressed. She touched the raw skin, gently wincing. The stove was warm. Someone had fed it during the night. Fresh wood sat stacked beside it. On the table, a pot of coffee sat steaming, still hot. Beside it, a plate with 4 biscuits and a jar of honey. Sarah stood and walked to the door. She opened it a crack and looked out. Jim Brennan stood by the corral, working with a length of rope. He was mending a section of fence, his movements efficient and practiced. He wore the same clothes as yesterday, the sheepskin coat open despite the cold. His breath made clouds in the air. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. He nodded once, then went back to his work. Sarah closed the door. She poured herself coffee in a tin cup and sat at the table. The coffee was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. She held the cup in both hands and let the warmth seep into her fingers. Behind her, Grace stirred. The girl sat up instantly, alert eyes scanning the room for threats. Old habit, one that would take time to break. "Mama," she whispered, "I am here." Grace saw the coffee, the biscuits, the warm stove. "He came in." "No," Sarah said. "He left them outside. I heard him on the porch before dawn." Grace stood and walked to the window. She watched Jim work for a long moment. "What does he want?" she asked. "I do not know." "Everyone wants something." Sarah set down her cup. "Grace, look at me." Grace turned. Her face was pinched, older than 12. Too old. "I know you do not trust him," Sarah said quietly. "I know you have learned not to trust anyone. But we have no choice right now. We have nowhere else to go. So we will stay here, and we will watch him. And if he proves to be like the others, we will leave. But until then, we eat his food and we sleep in his house, and we say thank you. Do you understand?" Grace's jaw tightened. "Yes, Mama." "Good." Sarah stood. "Now help me make breakfast, real breakfast, with eggs, if he has them." They found eggs in the cold room off the back of the house, 10 of them, brown and speckled. There was also a side of bacon still good in the winter cold and more flour than Sarah had seen in 6 months. She made flapjacks while Grace fried the bacon. Samuel woke to the smell and sat up silently. Lily bounded up with the energy only 4-year-olds possessed, chattering about the bed and the house and the pretty cups on the shelf. When breakfast was ready, Sarah stepped outside. Jim was still working on the fence. He had removed his coat despite the temperature. Sweat darkened his shirt between his shoulder blades. "Mr. Jim?" she called. He turned. "Breakfast is ready, if you would like to come in." Jim hesitated. He looked at the house, then back at her. "You do not need to cook for me, ma'am." "I know, but I did, and it will go cold if you do not eat it." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. He pulled his coat back on and walked toward the house. Sarah went back inside. Her heart beat faster than it should. Grace stood near the stove, tense as wire. Samuel watched the door. Only Lily seemed unconcerned, arranging forks on the table with great concentration. Jim stopped at the threshold. He removed his hat and held it in both hands. "May I come in?" he asked. "Permission." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. "Yes," she said. Jim entered, moving slowly, keeping his distance. He sat at the table only after Sarah gestured to the chair. Grace set a plate in front of him without a word. 3 flapjacks, 4 strips of bacon, 2 eggs. More food than any of them had eaten in weeks. "Thank you," Jim said quietly. They ate in silence. Jim cut his food into small bites and chewed thoroughly, not rushing. Sarah noticed he took the smallest portions, leaving more for the children. When Lily dropped her fork, he picked it up and wiped it clean on his sleeve before handing it back. "You have chickens?" Grace asked suddenly. Jim looked at her. 10 of them, in the coop behind the barn. "Who takes care of them?" "I do." "They lay well for this time of year." "They do," Jim agreed. "I keep them warm and fed. They return the favor." Grace considered this. "Can I see them?" "If you want." After breakfast, Jim led Grace and Samuel out to the coop while Sarah cleaned the dishes. Lily stayed behind playing with a wooden spoon and a tin pot. Through the window, Sarah watched Jim show Grace how to collect eggs, how to check for broody hens, how to scatter feed so the weaker birds got their share. Grace listened with fierce attention. Samuel stood back, watching, but not participating. Then Jim did something Sarah did not expect. He knelt in the snow beside Samuel and spoke quietly. She could not hear the words, but she saw Samuel's face change slightly, saw him nod once, saw Jim place a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Samuel did not pull away. When they came back inside, Grace carried 6 more eggs in her apron. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. She looked almost like a child again. "Mr. Jim says I can help with the chickens every morning," she announced, "if we are still here." "We will see," Sarah said carefully. That afternoon, Jim saddled one of his horses and rode toward town. He did not say where he was going or when he would return. Sarah felt anxiety spike in her chest. What if he did not come back? What if he changed his mind? What if this was all some elaborate cruelty? But he returned 3 hours later with a wagon full of supplies: potatoes, onions, carrots, dried beans, rice, sugar, salt, lamp oil, and a bolt of blue cloth. "For the children," he said, nodding at the cloth. "They need warmer clothes." That night Sarah cut patterns by lamplight, while Jim sat by the stove whittling a piece of wood. He worked slowly, carefully, his knife moving in smooth strokes. Lily watched him with wide eyes. "What are you making?" she asked. "A horse," Jim said. "For you. For me, if you want it." Lily's face lit up. "Yes, please." "Then you shall have it. But it will take a few days." "I can wait," Lily said solemnly. Over the next week, a routine developed. Jim woke before dawn and fed the animals. Sarah made breakfast. Grace helped with the chickens. Samuel still did not speak, but he began following Jim around the ranch, watching everything the older man did. Lily chattered to anyone who would listen. Jim slept in the barn. Every night Sarah locked the door from the inside. Every morning she found fresh wood on the porch and coffee already heating on the stove he had somehow tended through the window. He never asked to come inside unless invited. He never touched any of them without permission. He worked from sunrise to sunset, maintaining the ranch, repairing what needed fixing, preparing for the spring that was still months away. And slowly, carefully, Sarah began to believe he might actually be what he seemed. A man who had lost everything and was trying to fill the emptiness by helping others fill theirs. But Grace remained suspicious. Sarah would catch her daughter watching Jim with narrow eyes, testing him in small ways, dropping things to see if he would pick them up, asking questions to catch him in lies, refusing help to see if he would force it. Jim passed every test without seeming to notice they were tests. Then came the night that changed everything. It was the 10th night since they had arrived. Sarah woke to the sound of crying. Not Lily, Samuel. She sat up quickly. In the darkness she could see Samuel's small form shaking on his blanket. Grace was already beside him, holding him, but the boy thrashed and whimpered, lost in whatever nightmare had captured him. Sarah moved to help, but Samuel's cries grew louder, desperate, the sound of a child drowning in grief. The door burst open. Jim stood in the doorway, hair wild, chest heaving. He wore only his undershirt and pants, no coat, no boots. He must have run from the barn. In his right hand he held a gun. "What happened?" he demanded. Then he saw Samuel, and his face changed. He lowered the gun immediately. "Nightmare." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Jim set the gun on the table and walked to Samuel. He knelt beside the boy. Grace started to protest, but Jim held up a hand. "Samuel," he said quietly. "Samuel, wake up. You are safe. You are here with your mama and your sisters. Wake up, son." Samuel's eyes flew open, wild and terrified. He saw Jim and scrambled backward, hitting the wall. "No," he gasped. His first word in 8 months. "No, Papa, do not go back. The mine. Papa, the mine." Understanding crashed over Sarah like cold water. Samuel had been there, had watched his father go into the mine that morning, had been standing outside when the mountain came down. Jim did not move. "Samuel, I am not your papa. I am Jim. And you are not at the mine. You are safe." "Papa went in," Samuel whispered. "He said he would be right back. He said not to worry." Then the mountain shook and everyone was screaming, and Papa did not come out. He did not come out. Tears streamed down his face. His whole body shook. Jim slowly, carefully opened his arms. "Samuel, may I hold you? Permission. Always permission." Samuel stared at him. Then he lunged forward and buried his face in Jim's chest. Sobs tore out of him, 8 months of grief finally breaking free. Jim wrapped his arms around the boy and held him tight. "I have got you," Jim murmured. "I have got you. Let it out. Let it all out." Sarah pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from sobbing herself. Grace stood frozen tears on her own face. Lily woke and started to cry in sympathy. Jim rocked Samuel gently the way a father rocks a child and let him cry until there was nothing left. Then he carried the exhausted boy to the bed and laid him down. He pulled the blanket up to Samuel's chin. "Sleep now," Jim said softly. "Your papa loved you very much. He did not want to leave you. But sometimes bad things happen, and there is nothing anyone can do. That does not mean it was your fault. That does not mean he did not love you. Do you understand?" Samuel nodded weakly. "Good." Jim stood. "I will be right outside if you need me." "No," Samuel whispered. "Stay. Please stay." Jim looked at Sarah. She knotted her throat too tight for words. Jim pulled the chair near the bed and sat. He rested his hand on Samuel's shoulder. The boy's eyes closed. Within minutes, his breathing evened out. Grace climbed into bed beside Lily. Sarah sat on the edge of the mattress watching Jim watch her son. "You knew," she said finally. "You knew he was there." "I guessed," Jim said quietly. "The way he watched me work, always checking to make sure I came back, always afraid something would take me away. I have seen that look before, in soldiers who lost their brothers in battle, in children who watched their parents die. It is the look of someone who knows the world can end without warning." "How did you know what to say?" Jim was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because I had the same nightmares," he said. "After Mary and Emma died, I would wake up screaming, thinking I could still hear Emma calling for me, thinking I could have saved them if I had just tried harder, done something different, been better somehow." He paused. "No one was there to tell me it was not my fault. So I am telling him, before it destroys him the way it almost destroyed me." Sarah felt tears slip down her face. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Jim said. "I should have seen it sooner." He stayed in that chair all night. Sarah watched him through half-closed eyes. He did not sleep, just sat there with his hand on Samuel's shoulder, keeping watch, keeping the nightmares at bay. In the morning, Samuel woke and looked up at Jim. The boy's eyes were red and swollen, but clearer than they had been in months. "Mr. Jim," he whispered, "I am here. Will you teach me to fix the fence like you showed Grace the chickens?" Jim's face did something complicated. Relief and pain and hope all mixed together. "I would be honored," he said. Samuel smiled. Small and fragile, but real. That was the day everything changed. The day Sarah stopped watching Jim for signs of betrayal and started watching him for signs of the man he actually was. The day Grace's walls cracked just slightly. The day Samuel spoke and kept speaking. And the day Sarah realized that maybe, just maybe, this broken man with his broken family might find a way to heal each other. But healing was never simple. And the world outside Jim's ranch was not finished with them yet. 3 days later they were eating dinner when hoofbeats sounded outside. Many of them. Sarah's heart stopped. Grace went white. Samuel grabbed his mother's hand. Jim stood slowly. He walked to the door and looked out. His shoulders tensed. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "No matter what happens, stay inside and lock the door." He stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. Sarah rushed to the window. 6 horses stood in the yard. 6 men. And at the front, sitting tall in his saddle with a smile like a knife, was Howard Blackwell. Marshal Dixon sat beside him, looking uncomfortable. The other 4 were ranch hands, hired gunsmen who did what they were paid to do without asking questions. "Brennan," Blackwell called out. His voice carried easily in the cold air. "We need to talk." "Then talk," Jim said. He stood on the porch, arms loose at his sides, weight balanced. Ready. I have been thinking about our transaction, Blackwell said, and I believe there was a legal error. What error? The contract Mrs. Mitchell signed included her children. You paid her debt, but the children were part of the agreement, separate line items. Therefore, they still belong to me. Sarah felt the world tilt. No. That is not how debt works, Jim said calmly. That is how my contract works. I have it here, signed and witnessed. Marshal Dixon has reviewed it, haven't you? Frank Dixon shifted in his saddle. The contract does list the children separately, he said reluctantly. Technically, Mr. Blackwell has a claim. Technically, Jim repeated. The word came out flat and dangerous. Tell me, Marshal, when did you become a lawyer? I am just reading what is written. You are reading what Blackwell wants you to read. Jim took one step forward. But I will make this simple. Those children are under my protection. If you want them, you will have to go through me. Blackwell's smile widened. I was hoping you would say that. He gestured. Two of his men dismounted. They were large, hard-looking men with guns on their hips and clubs in their hands. I am authorized by territorial law to retrieve my property, Blackwell said. You can step aside or you can be moved aside. Your choice. Behind the window, Sarah's hand found the shotgun Jim kept by the door. Grace saw and shook her head desperately, but Sarah's hands closed around the cold metal anyway. Jim looked at the two men approaching him, then at Blackwell, then at Dixon. Frank, he said quietly, you know this is wrong. Dixon would not meet his eyes. I have my orders. You have your bribes. Brennan, do not make this harder than it needs to be. It is already as hard as it can be, Jim said, because I am not moving. The first man reached the porch. Last chance, friend. I am not your friend. The man swung his club. Jim moved, fast. Faster than a man his size should move. He ducked under the swing, drove his fist into the man's stomach, grabbed the club as the man doubled over, and used it to block the second man's strike. Wood cracked against wood. Jim spun, kicked the second man's knee, heard it pop, and brought the club down on the first man's shoulder. Both men went down, hard. The remaining two men on horseback reached for their guns. Jim threw the club at one, hitting him square in the chest and knocking him from his saddle. Then Jim drew his own gun. The Colt appeared in his hand like magic. Do not, he said quietly. The last man froze, hand on his pistol, but not drawing. Get your men and get off my land, Jim said. His voice was still calm, still quiet, but there was something underneath it now, something cold and final. If you come back, I will not be gentle. Blackwell's face was red. This is not over, Brennan. Yes, it is. You lost. Accept it and move on. I will have the law on you. Then bring the law. Real law. A judge, a jury, people who cannot be bought. And we will see what they say about a man who tries to enslave children. Jim's eyes locked on Dixon. Because that is what this is, Frank. Slavery. And we fought a war over that. Remember. Dixon's face went gray. He looked at Blackwell, then at Jim, then at the two men groaning in the snow. Howard, he said quietly, maybe we should rethink this. I pay you to follow orders, not to think. You pay me to enforce the law, not to break it. This is the law. No, Dixon said. He sounded tired. It is not. Not anymore. He turned his horse. I am done. He rode away, just like that, leaving Blackwell and his men alone. Blackwell stared after him with naked fury. Then he looked at Jim. You have made a very powerful enemy. I already told you I had one before. Jim cocked his gun. Now get off my land before I forget I am trying to be a better man. Blackwell yanked his horse's head around. His remaining men gathered their injured companions and mounted up. They rode off into the gathering dusk, a trail of curses and threats left hanging in the air. Jim stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Then he holstered his gun and turned to the door. Sarah opened it before he could knock. She still held the shotgun. Her hands shook. Are you hurt? She asked. No? He will come back. I know. What do we do? Jim looked at her, then at the children huddled behind her, Grace fierce and afraid, Samuel pale and trembling, Lily crying quietly. We fight, Jim said simply. We go to the territorial court in 3 weeks when it convenes. We bring witnesses. We prove Blackwell's contracts are illegal. We end this, properly. What if we lose? Jim's jaw tightened. We will not lose. I will not let him take your children. I promise you that. There was that word again, promise. The same word he had used when he told them they were safe. And somehow, despite everything, Sarah believed him. She stepped aside. Come in, please. You should not sleep in the barn tonight. Jim hesitated. The children. The children need to know you are here, that you are not leaving, that when you say you will protect us, you mean it. She swallowed. We all need to know that. Jim looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and stepped inside. That night, for the first time, Jim Brennan slept under the same roof as the family he had bought and freed and was now fighting to keep. He sat in the chair by the stove gun across his lap and kept watch while they slept. And when Sarah woke in the deepest part of the night and saw him there silhouetted against the dying fire, she felt something she had not felt since Robert died. She felt protected. Not owned, not controlled, protected. There was a difference. And for the first time in her life, she understood what that difference meant. 3 days passed before Father Thomas O'Brien arrived at the ranch. He came alone on a gray mare, his black coat dusted with snow, his face red from the wind. He was 62 years old and had been the priest of Billings for 20 years. He had baptized half the children in the territory and buried a third of their parents. He was one of the few men Howard Blackwell could not buy. Jim met him in the yard. They shook hands in silence, the grip firm and brief. "I heard what happened," Father O'Brien said. His voice was rough from years of preaching in cold churches. "The whole town knows. Blackwell is telling everyone you assaulted his men without cause." "And what does the whole town believe?" "Half of them believe him. The other half wishes they had your courage." The priest looked toward the house. "May I meet them?" Sarah stood in the doorway with the children behind her. She had seen the priest before at Robert's funeral, but he had been a distant figure, then speaking words that meant nothing while her husband lay in a pine box. Now he stood in front of her and removed his hat. His hair was white, his eyes blue and sharp and kind. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "I am sorry we meet again under such circumstances." "Father," she said carefully, "why are you here?" "Because Jim asked for my help, and because what Blackwell is doing is an abomination before God." He glanced at Jim. "May I come in?" They gathered around the table. Father O'Brien accepted coffee and warmed his hands on the cup. Grace sat closest to him, watching with intense suspicion. Samuel stayed near Jim. Lily climbed into her mother's lap. "I have reviewed Blackwell's contracts," the priest began. "All 12 of them. He has done this before, trapped people in debt and converted it to labor agreements. Technically legal under territorial law, but morally and spiritually wrong. Can we fight it?" Sarah asked. "Yes, but not easily." Father O'Brien pulled papers from his coat. "There is a precedent. In 1867, the territorial legislature passed a law prohibiting indentured servitude. The problem is proving that these contracts constitute servitude rather than legitimate debt collection." "They have collars," Grace said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. Mama had one. "I saw 2 others at the general store, women who worked for Mr. Blackwell. They wore collars." Father O'Brien's face went hard. "Did they?" "Iron ones, locked." The priest set down his cup carefully. "That changes things. Physical restraint makes it slavery, not servitude. But we need witnesses willing to testify." "They won't," Sarah said quietly. "They are too afraid." "Then we find others who will. People Blackwell has wronged. People who have nothing left to lose." Father O'Brien looked at Jim. "I know a woman, Anna Weber. Her husband died 3 years ago. Blackwell foreclosed on her land. She lost everything. She might talk." "Where is she now?" Jim asked. "Working at the boarding house, cleaning rooms for 20 cents a day. Will you ask her?" "I will do better than ask. I will bring her here. Let her meet Mrs. Mitchell. Let her see that someone finally stood up to him." The priest stood. "The territorial court convenes in 3 weeks. Judge Henry Caldwell presiding. He is fair but cautious. We will need more than testimony. We will need documentation, proof of Blackwell's pattern." "I will find it," Jim said. "How?" "I have friends, men I served with during the war. One of them works at the land office in Helena. If there are records, he will find them." Father O'Brien nodded slowly. "Then we have a plan. I will gather witnesses. You gather evidence. In 3 weeks we bring it all before the judge and pray for justice." "And if we lose?" Sarah asked. The priest looked at her with infinite sadness. "Then you run. You take these children, and you go somewhere Blackwell cannot reach. Canada, perhaps? Or California? You start over with new names, and you never come back." "I will not run," Jim said flatly. "Then you will die. Or worse, you will watch them taken." Father O'Brien put his hand on Jim's shoulder. "I know you are a good man, James Brennan. I know you want to do right. But sometimes right means survival. Remember that." He left as the sun touched the horizon, a dark shape against the red sky. That night Sarah found Jim on the hill behind the house. She had seen him walk up there after dinner, had watched him stand among the pine trees for almost an hour. Finally, she put on her coat and followed. He stood before 2 wooden crosses, weathered and simple, names carved deep into the wood. Mary Brennan, Emma Brennan, born and died. Nothing else. Sarah stopped a few feet away, not wanting to intrude. "They are beautiful names," she said softly. Jim did not turn. "Mary chose Emma, said it meant universal. Said our daughter would be loved by everyone who met her." His voice caught. She was right. Emma could make anyone smile, even on the hardest days. "How long were you married?" 8 years. We met in Ohio. I was working on a farm. She was the owner's daughter. We should not have suited each other. I was nobody. She was educated, refined. But she saw something in me I did not see in myself." He finally looked at Sarah. "She made me want to be better." "You are better." "I try. Some days more successfully than others." Sarah moved closer. The crosses cast long shadows in the fading light. "Do you come here often?" "Every night since you arrived. I tell them about you. About Grace and Samuel and Lily. I tell them I am trying to help, trying to do what Mary would have wanted." He paused. "I ask if they understand, if they forgive me for caring about someone else." "And do they answer?" "Sometimes I think they do. Sometimes I hear Mary telling me not to be foolish, that love does not run out, that there is always room for more." He smiled slightly. She was wise that way. Sarah looked at the graves. 2 lives ended too soon. A husband left behind to carry the weight alone. "I had 8 months with Robert," she said. "After he died, I thought I would never feel anything again except emptiness. But then I look at my children, and I remember that he gave me them. That part of him still lives, and it helps." "Does it get easier?" "No, it just gets different. The pain does not go away. You just learn to carry it better." Jim nodded. They stood in silence, 2 people who understood loss in a way most never would. "Jim," Sarah said finally, "what you said to Father O'Brien about not running. Why, because running solves nothing. It just moves the problem somewhere else. And eventually Blackwell or someone like him finds you again. The only way to end this is to face it, even if it costs you everything." "I have already lost everything once," Jim said quietly. "I survived it. Barely. But I did. And I learned something. The things worth fighting for are not land or money or pride. They are people. Connection. Family. Even family you choose rather than inherit." He looked at her directly. "You and your children are worth fighting for. That is all I know. That is enough." Sarah felt tears burn behind her eyes. "You barely know us." "I know enough. I know Grace is strong and scared and trying to protect everyone. I know Samuel carries guilt that is not his to carry. I know Lily still believes the world can be good, and I know you held all of them together when everything fell apart. That is all I need to know. What if we lose in court? Then we find another way. There might not be another way." Jim turned to face her fully. In the dying light, his eyes were darker than usual, shadowed and determined. "Sarah," he said, using her name for the first time, "I made a promise. I said I would not let Blackwell take your children. I meant it. If the court fails, if the law fails, if everything fails, I will still keep that promise. Even if it means leaving everything behind, even if it means becoming an outlaw, even if it costs me my life. Do you understand?" Sarah could not speak. The weight of his words, the absolute certainty in his voice, pressed against her chest like a physical thing. "Why?" she finally managed. "Why would you sacrifice so much?" Jim was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so soft she almost missed it. "Because when I stood on that hill 2 years ago and wanted to die, I made a different promise. I promised Mary that if I kept living, I would make it mean something. I would not waste the life I still had. And then you appeared, and I realized this was my chance. This was how I make it mean something, by saving you the way no one saved me." He turned back to the graves. "So I am not doing this for you. Not really. I am doing it for them, for Mary and Emma, to prove I deserve the life they do not have. Do you understand?" Sarah understood. She understood that this broken man was trying to heal himself by healing others, that his promise to her was also a promise to the dead, that he was not a savior but a survivor trying desperately to find purpose in a world that had taken everything from him. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm. He looked down at it, surprised. "Then we will fight together," she said. "For them, for us, for whatever comes next." Jim covered her hand with his own. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. They stood like that as darkness fell completely, 2 people bound by loss and hope and the fragile promise of something better. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Jim rode to Helena and returned 3 days later with a packet of documents. Records showing 12 families Blackwell had forced into labor contracts over the past 5 years. Dates, amounts, signatures. proof of a pattern. Father O'Brien brought Anna Weber to the ranch. She was a small woman, worn thin by hardship, with eyes that had seen too much. She sat at the table and told her story in a flat, emotionless voice. How Blackwell had loaned her money after her husband died. How the interest compounded faster than she could pay. How he came one day with the marshal and a contract and told her she had two choices, sign or starve. "I signed," she said. "What else could I do? I worked his kitchens for 2 years, 18 hours a day. He fed me scraps and paid me nothing. Said it was all going toward the debt. But the debt never got smaller. It only grew." "How did you get free?" Sarah asked. "I did not. I ran. In the middle of the night. Left everything behind. He could have hunted me down, but I was not worth the effort. There were always others to replace me." Anna looked at Sarah with hollow eyes. "You are the first person to actually fight him, the first one who did not just accept it." "I did not fight him," Sarah said quietly. "Jim did." Anna looked at Jim. "Why?" "Because someone had to. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Anna studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I will testify. I will tell the judge everything, but you should know Blackwell will come after me too." "Let him try," Jim said. Father O'Brien also brought a second witness, a man named Thomas Creek Half-Crow Indian who had worked Blackwell's mines under contract. He had scars on his back from whippings. He had lost 3 fingers to a cave, and that happened because Blackwell refused to pay for proper supports. He spoke quietly without emotion, and his testimony was more damning than any amount of documentation. Grace listened to every word. She sat in the corner and absorbed it all, her young face growing harder with each story. One night, after the witnesses had left, she approached Jim. "If we lose in court," she said, "what happens?" Jim looked at her carefully. "We already discussed this. I want to hear you say it again. We leave, all of us. We go somewhere he cannot find us." "And you would come with us? Leave your ranch, your home?" "Yes." "Why?" Jim knelt, so he was eye level with her. "Grace, I am going to tell you something, and I need you to believe me. Your mother and Samuel and Lily are not burdens to me. You are not charity cases. You are the best thing that has happened to me in 2 years. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to fix things and build things and plan for tomorrow. Before you came, I was just waiting to die. Now I am trying to live. That is what you gave me. So if we have to leave, if we have to start over somewhere new, I will do it gladly. Because wherever you are is home enough." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She brushed them away angrily. "I am sorry I did not trust you. You had no reason to trust me." "I do now." She hugged him, then quick and fierce, her arms tight around his neck. Jim held her carefully, this child who had been forced to grow up too fast, and let her cry against his shoulder. When she pulled back, her face was wet, but her expression was determined. "I have something," she said, "something that might help in court." She ran to her small bundle of possessions and pulled out a thin notebook. The pages were worn, the cover stained. She handed it to Jim. "I wrote down everything," she said. "Every time Mr. Blackwell came to see Mama, every threat he made, every time he raised the interest, every lie he told about what we owed. The dates are all there, the amounts, everything." Jim opened the notebook, page after page of careful handwriting, a child's script recording an adult's cruelty. "Grace," he said softly, "this is evidence, real evidence. Why did you not show me before? I was afraid you would take it, that you would use it, and then we would have nothing left to bargain with. But I trust you now, so you can have it." Jim looked at Father O'Brien, who had been listening quietly. The priest took the notebook and read a few pages. His face went white. "This is a record of criminal extortion," he said, "with dates and amounts and witnesses. Grace, this could win the case by itself." "Then use it," Grace said simply. "Make him pay." That night Sarah tucked Grace into bed and kissed her forehead. "You were very brave today," she said. "I was scared." Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right, despite the fear. Grace looked up at her mother. "Mama, do you think we will win?" "I do not know, sweetheart. But you hope." "I hope very much." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you like Mr. Jim?" Sarah felt her breath catch. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look at him the way Papa said he looked at you, before I was born. Like he was afraid you would disappear if he looked away." Sarah did not know what to say to that. Did she look at Jim that way? She thought about his hands, fixing things, his voice speaking gently to Samuel, his eyes when he looked at the graves on the hill. She thought about the way her heart beat faster when he came in from the cold, the way she listened for his footsteps, the way she felt safer when he was near. "I think," she said carefully, "that Mr. Jim is a good man, and good men are rare. So yes, I like him. But more than that, I respect him, and I trust him, and that matters more than liking." "Papa would have liked him too," Grace said. "Yes," Sarah said softly. "I think he would have." She left Grace to sleep and found Jim outside staring up at the stars. The night was clear and bitterly cold. Their breath made clouds in the air. 3 days, Jim said without looking at her. 3 days until court. Are you nervous? Terrified. You do not look terrified. I have had practice hiding it. He glanced at her. Are you ready? As ready as I can be. They stood in comfortable silence. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles. Jim, Sarah said finally. What Grace said. About leaving if we lose. Did you mean it? Every word. Where would we go? North. Canada. I have friends in Alberta. Ranchers who would not ask questions. We could start over. Build something new. You would give up everything you have built here. Jim looked at the ranch spread out below them, the house he had built with his own hands, the barn where Mary's horse had once lived, the land he and his wife had dreamed of turning into something lasting. I built this place for a future that died 2 years ago, he said quietly. Maybe it is time to build for a different future, one that is actually possible. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a door opening, a possibility taking shape. And would we all go, she asked carefully, or just me and the children? Jim looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes searching hers in the starlight. All of us, he said, if you want me there. I want you there. The words hung between them, simple, true, heavy, with meaning. Jim took a step closer. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I am not trying to replace Robert. I am not trying to take his place in your heart or in your children's hearts, but I am here, and I care about what happens to you, all of you. And if we have to run, if we have to start over, I want to do it together, as a family. The kind you choose rather than inherit. Sarah reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the scar along his jaw. He went very still. You are not a replacement, she said softly. You are something new, something different, something Robert would have wanted for us because he loved us enough to want us cared for even after he was gone. You think so? I know so. Jim closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I am going to do everything I can to win this fight, he said. But if we lose, if the worst happens, I promise you will still be safe. I promise your children will grow up free. And I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret trusting me. I already do not regret it. You might, when you see what I am willing to do to keep you safe. Then I will deal with that when it comes. Jim pulled her close, then, not romantically but protectively, his arms around her shoulders, her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating strong and steady. 3 days, he whispered into her hair. In 3 days, everything changes. Sarah held on to him and looked up at the stars and hoped with everything she had that the change would be in their favor. Because if it was not, if they lost, then the man holding her was prepared to become an outlaw, to abandon everything and run, to live outside the law for the sake of a woman and 3 children he had known for less than a month. And the terrifying thing was she believed he would do it. The even more terrifying thing was she would let him. The blizzard came 2 days before the trial. It started as light snow in the morning, the kind that drifted down softly and melted on contact. By noon the flakes were larger, falling faster. By evening the wind had risen to a howl, and the world disappeared behind a wall of white. Jim stood in the doorway of the barn, watching the snow pile up in drifts that reached his knees. Behind him the cattle shifted and lowed nervously. 20 head, everything he owned besides the land itself, and at least 4 of them were missing. He had counted twice. 16 in the barn, 4 unaccounted for. They must have wandered toward the far pasture before the storm hit. If they were out there in this cold, they would freeze before morning. Sarah appeared at the barn door wrapped in blankets, her face pale. How bad is it? She called over the wind. Bad. 4 cows are missing. Can we wait until it passes? If we wait, they die. And if they die, I lose 1/4 of my herd. I cannot afford that. Sarah understood. Without those cows, without the money, they represented Jim would have nothing to fall back on if they lost the trial. No resources to start over, no way to support them. I will go with you, she said. No, too dangerous. Then you will go alone and freeze to death trying to save them by yourself. She stepped closer. I am not fragile, Jim. I know how to work. I know how to survive cold, and you need help. Jim wanted to argue, wanted to send her back to the house where it was safe and warm. But he looked at her face, at the determination there, and recognized something he had seen in Mary, strength that would not be denied. "Get dressed warmly," he said. "Layers, everything you have." They told the children they would be back before dawn. Grace immediately protested. "Let me come," she said. "I can help." "No," Jim said firmly. "I need you here to watch Samuel and Lily. Keep the fire going. If we are not back by morning, take the children to Father O'Brien. Tell him what happened. He will know what to do." Grace's face went white. "You think you might not come back?" "I think this storm is dangerous, and I want someone I trust protecting your brother and sister." That was the right thing to say. Grace straightened, accepting the responsibility. "I will keep them safe." "I know you will." Jim and Sarah rode out on his two strongest horses, leading a third horse on a rope for carrying supplies. They had rope blankets, a lantern, matches wrapped in oilcloth, and 2 rifles in case they encountered wolves. The cold hit like a fist. Within minutes, Sarah's face was numb. Within an hour, she could not feel her hands even inside thick gloves. The wind screamed around them, driving snow into their eyes and mouths. Visibility was less than 10 feet. They could barely see their own horses' heads. Jim rode in front, following instinct more than sight. He had worked this land for years, knew every hill and hollow. But in a whiteout, even familiar territory became alien and deadly. 2 hours in, they found the first cow. She stood in a hollow snow piled against her side, too cold to move. Jim dismounted and approached slowly. The cow's eyes rolled white with fear. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy, girl. We are here to help." He got a rope around her neck and tied her to the pack horse. 1 down. 3 to go. They pushed deeper into the storm. Sarah's teeth chattered so hard she thought they would crack. Her legs had stopped working properly. Everything was cold and white and endless. Then Jim's horse stumbled. The animal went down on its front knees in a drift. Jim rolled off, landing hard in the snow. Sarah saw him try to stand and fall back. She was off her horse in seconds, wading through waist-deep snow to reach him. "My ankle," Jim gasped. "Twisted it." Sarah knelt beside him. Even through his boot she could feel the swelling. "Bad. Very bad." "Can you ride?" she asked. "I do not know." "Try." She helped him up. He put weight on the injured leg and immediately went white with pain. He tried again. Same result. "I cannot," he admitted. "Sarah, you have to go back. Take the horses, get the children, and go to town. I am not leaving you." "You have to. If you stay, we both die." "If I leave you, definitely die." They stared at each other. The wind howled. Snow gathered on their shoulders and hats. "There," Sarah said, suddenly pointing. Through the white she could just make out a darker shape. "What is that?" Jim squinted. "Old line shack, from when this was open range. Abandoned. Can we make it? Maybe, if I can walk." Sarah got under his arm, taking his weight. Together they stumbled toward the shack, leading the horses. Every step was agony for Jim. Sarah could feel him shaking, could hear his breathing turn ragged. The shack was barely standing. One wall had partially collapsed. The roof sagged dangerously. But it had 4 walls and a door that still closed. Sarah got Jim in awed and settled on the floor. Then she led the horses to the lee side of the shack, where they would have some protection. The cow they had found huddled with them, seeking warmth. Back inside, she assessed their situation. No firewood, no stove, just 4 walls and a roof that might collapse at any moment. Jim's lips were blue. His hands shook uncontrollably. "We need fire," she said. "No wood." "Then I will find some." "Sarah, no, you cannot go back out there." But she was already moving. She took the small hatchet from the pack and went outside. The wind nearly knocked her down. She forced herself forward toward a stand of dead trees she had glimpsed on the way in. It took her 40 minutes to cut enough branches for a fire. Her hands bled inside her gloves. Her face had no feeling. But she gathered an armload and made her way back to the shack. Inside, Jim had cleared a space in the center of the room. Sarah arranged the wood carefully, remembering what her father had taught her as a child. Small pieces first. Build a structure. Let the air flow. The matches were damp, despite the oilcloth. The first 3 would not light. The 4th sputtered and died. They had 2 left. Sarah's hand shook as she struck the 5th match. It caught. She held it to the smallest twigs. They smoked. Smoked more. Then finally a tiny flame appeared. She fed it carefully. More twigs, small branches, slightly larger pieces. The fire grew. Within minutes they had real heat. Jim crawled closer, holding his hands to the flames. Gradually, color returned to his face. "You saved our lives," he said quietly. "You would have done the same." "I could not have. Not with my ankle." "Then we are even. You saved me in Billings. I saved you here." They sat in silence, warming themselves. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the shack, the fire burned, and they were alive. "Jim," Sarah said after a while, "your ankle, how bad is it really?" He unwrapped the bandage she had tied and examined it in the firelight. The swelling had gotten worse. The joint was already turning purple. Sprained at best, broken at worst. Either way, I will not be walking on it for days. We are supposed to be in court the day after tomorrow. I know. If you do not show up, Blackwell wins by default. I know that too. Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. Everything they had planned, all the evidence they had gathered, Grace's notebook, the witnesses, all of it meant nothing if Jim could not stand before the judge. "I will go," she said suddenly. "At first light, I will ride back, get help, bring people here to carry you to town. In this storm you will die before you make it a mile." "Then what do we do?" Jim looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much loss. "We wait. We hope the storm breaks. We pray we make it back in time, and if we do not, then Father O'Brien will have to present the case without me." "Can he do that?" "I do not know. The evidence speaks for itself. Grace's notebook, the documents from Helena, the witnesses. Maybe it will be enough." But his voice said he did not believe it. Sarah did not believe it either. Without Jim there to tell the story, to show the judge what kind of man he was, the evidence was just paper. Blackwell would find a way to twist it, to explain it away, to make himself the victim. She moved closer to Jim, needing the comfort of another human being. He put his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that, backs against the wall, watching the fire burn down. "Tell me about Mary," Sarah said softly. Jim was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then she laughed at everything, even things that were not funny, especially things that were not funny. When the crops failed the first year, she laughed and said, "At least we would lose weight." When the roof leaked and ruined our bed, she laughed and said, "We needed to sleep closer together anyway." His voice cracked slightly. When she got sick, she laughed and said dying of fever was dramatic enough for her tastes. She made me promise not to be sad, said I should find someone else, someone who would make me laugh again. I told her that was impossible. She said I was being stupid. Those were her last words. "You are being stupid, James." Sarah felt tears on her face. "She sounds wonderful." She was, and she was right. I have been stupid. I spent 2 years mourning instead of living. 2 years wasted. He looked at Sarah. "And then you came along and reminded me what living felt like, what having something to fight for felt like. And now I might lose you anyway because I was too careless to watch where my horse was stepping. You have not lost us yet. But I might, if I cannot get to that courtroom." Sarah took his face in both hands and made him look at her. "Listen to me. Whether you are there or not, we will fight. Father O'Brien will present the evidence. Anna and Thomas will testify. Grace's notebook will speak for itself. And if it is not enough, if Blackwell wins, then we do what you said. We run. We go north. We start over. But we do it together. All of us. Because you are part of this family now, whether you meant to be or not." "Sarah, no. Let me finish." Her voice was fierce now. "You gave us hope when we had none. You gave us safety when the world was trying to destroy us. You showed my children that good men exist. You showed me that I could trust again. So whether we win or lose, whether you can walk or not, you are not allowed to give up. Do you understand? You are not allowed." Jim stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. "I understand." "Good." She kissed him then, quick and hard and full of all the things she could not say, fear and gratitude and something deeper that she was not ready to name. When she pulled back, Jim's eyes were wide with surprise. "What was that for?" he asked. "For being you. For being stupid enough to ride into a blizzard to save 4 cows. For being brave enough to stand up to Blackwell. For being kind enough to take in a woman and 3 children you did not know." She rested her forehead against his. "For making me feel alive again." Jim's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Sarah, when this is over, when we know what the court decides, I want to ask you something. Something important, but not now. Not when everything is uncertain. Is that all right? What do you want to ask me? You will know when the time comes." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire burning low, the storm raging outside. Sarah dreamed of courtrooms and collars, and a man with gray eyes who promised to fight for her no matter the cost. She woke to silence. The storm had passed. Pale sunlight streamed through the gaps in the walls. The fire was out. Beside her, Jim slept fitfully, his face tight with pain, even in sleep. Sarah eased away from him and went outside. The world was transformed. Snow covered everything in rolling white drifts. The sky was clear and painfully blue. In the distance, she could see the ranch buildings, small but visible. And she could see 3 dark shapes moving through the snow. The missing cows. They had survived. Sarah woke Jim gently. The storm stopped, and I can see the other cows. They are alive. Jim struggled to sit up. How far to the ranch? 2 miles, maybe 3. I cannot walk it, not on this ankle. Then I will bring help. Sarah, you need to go straight to town. Get to Father O'Brien. Tell him what happened. Make sure he is ready to present the case without me if necessary. What about you? I will be fine. Once you send help, they can bring me in. But the trial is more important. Promise me you will go straight to town. Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay with him. But he was right. The trial was tomorrow. If they were not there, if the evidence was not presented, everything they had fought for would be lost. I promise, she said. She saddled her horse, gathered the cow they had rescued, and prepared to leave. Jim called to her one last time. Sarah, when you get there, when you stand in that courtroom, remember something. You are stronger than he will ever be. Do not let him make you feel small. You are stronger than he will ever be. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then she rode out into the white morning, leading one cow home and leaving the man who had saved her behind in a broken shack in the middle of nowhere. The ride took 4 hours. 4 hours of fighting through snowdrifts, of coaxing her exhausted horse forward, of praying Jim would survive until help arrived. When she finally reached the ranch, Grace ran out to meet her. Where is Mr. Jim? Hurt. In the old line shack past the north pasture. Take Dutch Holloway and 2 other men. Bring him back safely. What about you? I am going to town. I have a trial to prepare for. Sarah changed horses, grabbed the packet of documents from the house, and rode for Billings. She reached Father O'Brien's church as the sun set. The priest took one look at her and knew. He is not coming, Father O'Brien said. He is hurt. Broken ankle. He is coming, but he might not make it in time. Then we do it without him. Can we win? Father O'Brien looked at her for a long moment. I do not know, child, but we will try. We will try with everything we have. That night, Sarah stayed at the boarding house where Anna Weber worked. She sat in a small room and read through Grace's notebook one more time, memorizing every entry, every date, every threat Blackwell had made. Tomorrow, in front of a judge and the whole town, she would have to stand up and fight for her children's freedom, without Jim beside her, without his quiet strength and unwavering certainty. She was terrified, but she was also ready, because Jim had taught her something important. He had taught her that being brave did not mean being unafraid. It meant doing what was necessary despite the fear. And tomorrow, she would be brave. For her children, for Jim, for everyone Blackwell had ever hurt. Tomorrow, she would fight. The courtroom was packed. Sarah had not expected that. She had imagined walking into an empty room standing before a judge while Blackwell's lawyer tore her apart with words. Instead, she found herself pushing through a crowd that spilled out the doors and onto the street. Everyone in Billings had come to watch. Father O'Brien met her at the entrance. He wore his clerical collar and his most severe expression. Behind him stood Anna Weber and Thomas Creek, both dressed in their best clothes, both looking terrified. Where is Jim? The priest asked quietly. Not here yet. Dutch went to get him, but I do not know if they will make it in time. Father O'Brien's jaw tightened. Then we proceed without him. Are you ready? Sarah looked through the doorway at the courtroom beyond, at the wooden benches packed with people, at the judge's bench empty and waiting, at Howard Blackwell sitting at the front table with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he had never lost a case. No, Sarah said honestly, but we are doing this anyway. They entered together. The crowd quieted as Sarah walked down the center aisle. She felt every eye on her, judging, assessing, waiting to see if she would break. She kept her head high and her shoulders back. Jim's words echoed in her mind. You are not a victim. You are a survivor. Judge Henry Caldwell entered from a side door. He was 65 years old, with white hair and a face carved from granite. He had been a judge for 30 years and had seen everything the frontier could offer. He sat behind his bench and surveyed the room with cold authority. This court is now in session, he said. His voice filled the room without effort. We are here to adjudicate the matter of Mitchell versus Blackwell. Is counsel present? Blackwell's lawyer stood. Edmund Pierce for the defendant, Your Honor. Father O'Brien stood. Father Thomas O'Brien representing Mrs. Sarah Mitchell and her children, Your Honor. Judge Caldwell frowned. You are not a lawyer, Father. No, Your Honor. But territorial law allows for representation by any citizen in good standing. I am acting on behalf of Mrs. Mitchell in that capacity. Where is James Brennan? I was told he would be present. Mr. Brennan has been delayed, Your Honor. We are prepared to proceed without him if necessary. The judge studied Father O'Brien for a long moment. Very well. Mr. Pierce, you may present your case. Edmund Pierce stood and smoothed his suit. He was a performer, Sarah realized, every gesture calculated for effect. Your Honor, this case is quite simple. Mr. Blackwell, a respected businessman and landowner, extended credit to Mrs. Mitchell's late husband in good faith. When Mr. Mitchell died, the debt passed to his widow as per the terms of the contract. Mrs. Mitchell failed to make payment. Mr. Blackwell, acting within his legal rights under territorial law, converted the debt to a labor agreement. This is standard practice. This is legal, and this court has no grounds to interfere in a private contract between two parties. He said it so smoothly, so confidently, as if enslaving a woman and her children was nothing more than a business transaction. Pierce continued, Furthermore, Your Honor, Mr. Brennan interfered with this legal arrangement by paying off only the primary debt, not the ancillary costs associated with the children. Per the contract, Mrs. Mitchell's 3 children were listed as separate labor assets with their own valuation. Mr. Brennan's payment covered Mrs. Mitchell only. The children remained bound to Mr. Blackwell. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. Separate assets. He was arguing her children were property. Judge Caldwell held up his hand for silence. Father O'Brien, your response. The priest stood. He held Grace's notebook in one hand and the documents from Helena in the other. Your Honor, Mr. Pierce is correct that the contract exists. What he fails to mention is how that contract was obtained, through threats, extortion, and physical intimidation. I have here testimony from multiple witnesses who will attest to Mr. Blackwell's pattern of predatory lending. I have documentation showing 12 similar cases over 5 years. And I have this. He held up the notebook. A daily record kept by Mrs. Mitchell's 12-year-old daughter. Grace Mitchell documented every interaction between her mother and Mr. Blackwell. Every threat, every increase in the supposed debt, every lie told about what was owed. Your Honor, this contract was not entered into freely. It was coerced, and under territorial law, a coerced contract is void. Pierce was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This so-called record is nothing more than a child's fantasy. It has no legal standing. I will determine what has legal standing, Judge Caldwell said sharply. Father, I will review this notebook, but first call your witnesses. Anna Weber took the stand first. She sat in the witness chair, small and frightened, her hands twisted in her lap. Father O'Brien approached her gently. Mrs. Weber, please tell the court about your experience with Mr. Blackwell. Anna's voice was barely audible. He loaned me money after my husband died, $200 to keep my farm. The interest was 6%, he said, but every month the amount I owed grew instead of shrinking. He said there were fees, processing fees, late fees, fees I had never agreed to. What happened when you could not pay? He came with the marshal. He had papers. He said I could work off the debt or lose everything. I signed. What else could I do? And what was this work? Cleaning his house, cooking 18 hours a day. He fed me scraps, beat me when I was too slow. She pulled back her sleeve. Old scars marked her forearm. I worked for 2 years. The debt never got smaller. Finally, I ran. Pierce stood. Your Honor, this woman is a fugitive from a legal contract. Her testimony is unreliable. Sit down, Mr. Pierce, the judge said. Mrs. Weber, did Mr. Blackwell ever use physical restraints on you? Anna hesitated, then nodded. A collar? Iron. He made me wear it for the first 6 months. Said it was to remind me of my place. The courtroom erupted. People shouted, some in outrage, some in disbelief. Judge Caldwell banged his gavel until silence returned. Mr. Blackwell, the judge said coldly, did you place an iron collar on this woman? Blackwell stood. His face was red, but his voice was steady. She was a flight risk, Your Honor. The collar was a reasonable precaution to protect my investment. Your investment? Yes, Your Honor. She owed me money. I had a right to protect my interests by treating a human being like livestock, by using the tools available under the law. Judge Caldwell's expression was unreadable. Continue, Father O'Brien. Thomas Creek testified next. He showed his scars, described the mine collapse that took his fingers, explained how Blackwell had blamed him for the accident and added medical costs to his debt, extending his contract by 3 years. Then Father O'Brien called Sarah. She walked to the stand on legs that shook. She sat and placed her hands flat on the wooden rail to stop them from trembling. The courtroom was silent. Every eye watched her. Mrs. Mitchell, Father O'Brien said gently, tell the court how you came to owe Mr. Blackwell money. Sarah took a breath. My husband borrowed money to buy mining equipment, $200. We were making payments, small ones, but regular. Then Robert died in the collapse. I went to Mr. Blackwell to explain I needed time. He said time was not available. He said the debt was due immediately. What did you owe at that point? $147. We had paid $53. And what did Mr. Blackwell say you owed? $287. He said there were late fees, interest penalties, storage costs for the equipment Robert never got to use because it was buried with him. Did you agree to these additional costs? No, but he said they were in the contract. He said if I did not pay or sign his labor agreement, he would take my children and place them in the territorial orphanage. He said I would never see them again. Pierce stood. Objection. Mr. Blackwell never threatened to separate this woman from her children. Sarah turned to look at him. He did. December 3rd, in front of the land office. He said it exactly. Sign or lose them forever. Those were his words. You remember the exact date. I remember everything about that day. It was the day he put this on me. Sarah pulled down the collar of her dress. The raw marks from the iron collar were still visible red and healing, but unmistakable. The courtroom gasped. Women covered their mouths. Men shifted uncomfortably. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. Mr. Blackwell, did you place a collar on Mrs. Mitchell? Blackwell's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Blackwell nodded and stood. I did, Your Honor, as was my right under the contract. Show me this contract. Pierce produced the document. Judge Caldwell read it slowly. His face grew darker with each line. This contract, the judge said slowly, includes language that Mrs. Mitchell and her 3 children agree to provide labor services for a period not to exceed the full satisfaction of the debt. It does not specify separate terms for the children. It does not use the word purchase or sale. But it does grant you authority to use reasonable restraints to prevent flight. Correct, Your Honor. And you interpreted that to mean iron collars. They are effective, Your Honor. Judge Caldwell set down the contract. Father O'Brien, I will see that notebook now. Father O'Brien handed over Grace's notebook. The judge read in silence. 1 page, 5 pages, 10. The courtroom waited. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, Judge Caldwell looked up. Is Grace Mitchell present? Grace stood from the front bench. I am here, Your Honor. Come forward, child. Grace walked to the stand. She looked tiny in the witness chair, but when she spoke, her voice was strong. You wrote this? The judge asked, holding up the notebook. Yes, Your Honor. Every word, every date. I wrote it down because Mama said we needed to remember. She said someday someone might ask what really happened, so I wrote it all down. Judge Caldwell turned to a specific page. On December 3rd, you wrote that Mr. Blackwell said the following. I will break you, Sarah Mitchell. You will work until your hands bleed and your back breaks. Your children will learn what it means to be owned, and when you die, they will still owe me. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Honor. He said it right in front of me and Samuel. Lily was too young to understand, but Samuel heard every word. That is when he stopped talking. The judge looked at Samuel sitting beside Sarah. The boy stared straight ahead, his face blank. Mr. Blackwell, Judge Caldwell said, did you say these things? I may have used strong language, Your Honor, but the woman was being difficult. Strong language. The judge closed the notebook carefully. Mr. Pierce, your client has admitted to placing iron collars on 2 women. He has admitted to threatening to separate a mother from her children. He has admitted to extending debts through fees that were never agreed to. He has admitted to using what he himself acknowledges as strong language. How do you defend this? Pierce stood. Your Honor, everything my client did was legal under territorial law. These contracts exist. They were signed. The law allows for debt conversion to labor. The law allows for reasonable restraints. My client operated within those boundaries. The law also prohibits slavery, Mr. Pierce. We fought a war over that. This is not slavery, Your Honor. This is contract labor, with iron collars, a regrettable but legal method of preventing flight. Judge Caldwell stood. The entire courtroom rose with him. I am calling a recess. 1 hour. I need to review these documents and consider the law. Court is adjourned. He left through the side door. The courtroom erupted in noise. People shouted questions. Reporters scribbled notes. Sarah sat in the witness chair, unable to move. Father O'Brien came to her. You did well. Is it enough? I do not know. They waited in a small room behind the courthouse. Anna and Thomas sat silently. Grace paced. Sarah stared at her hands and prayed. 30 minutes into the recess, the door burst open. Jim stood there, supported by Dutch Holloway and another rancher. His face was gray with pain. His ankle was wrapped in bandages and splinted. But he was there. The courtroom fell silent. Every head turned. Jim Brennan, pale and limping, made his way down the aisle. His splinted ankle dragged slightly with each step, but his eyes were clear and determined. Sarah's breath caught. He had come. Despite the pain, despite everything, he had kept his promise. Judge Caldwell looked up. "Mr. Brennan, I was told you were injured. I was your honor," Jim said, his voice steady despite the obvious pain. "But I made a promise to be here, and I keep my promises." "Did I miss it?" he asked. Sarah ran to him. "Jim, you should not be here. You should be resting." "I made a promise. I'm keeping it." He looked at Father O'Brien. "What did I miss?" The priest quickly summarized the testimony. Jim listened, his expression growing darker. "The judge has not decided." "Not yet." He called a recess. "Then I need to testify." "Jim, you can barely stand." "I can stand long enough." He looked at Sarah. "I need to tell him why I paid your debt. I need to make him understand." Before anyone could argue, the bailiff appeared. "Court is resuming. Everyone back inside." They filed back into the courtroom. Jim hobbled down the aisle, refusing help, his jaw set against the pain. He took a seat beside Sarah. She gripped his hand and did not let go. Judge Caldwell returned. His face revealed nothing. "I have reviewed the evidence," he said. "I have considered the law, and I have reached a decision." Sarah stopped breathing. "First, regarding the contract. While territorial law does allow for debt conversion to labor agreements, such agreements must be entered into freely and without coercion. The testimony presented today, combined with the documentary evidence and young Grace's meticulous record, convinces me that Mrs. Mitchell did not freely enter this agreement. She was threatened, intimidated, and placed under duress. Therefore, the contract is void." Relief flooded through Sarah, but the judge was not finished. "Second, regarding the children, Mr. Pierce argues they were listed separately and remain bound despite Mr. Brennan's payment. I reject this argument entirely. Children cannot be contracted as labor without their consent or the consent of a legal guardian acting in their best interest. Mrs. Mitchell, under duress and threat, could not provide such consent. Therefore, any claim Mr. Blackwell has to these children's labor is void." Grace made a small sound. Sarah squeezed Jim's hand harder. "Third, regarding the collars. The use of iron collars on free citizens, regardless of contractual status, is barbaric and unconscionable. It violates every principle this nation fought for. Mr. Blackwell, you will immediately surrender any such devices in your possession. If I hear of you using them again, I will hold you in contempt and jail you myself." Blackwell's face was purple with rage, but he said nothing. "Finally," Judge Caldwell continued, "I am ordering a full investigation into Mr. Blackwell's lending practices. The territorial attorney will review all contracts for the past 10 years. Anyone found to be under similar duress will have their contracts voided. Anyone who has already completed service under false pretenses will be entitled to compensation." He banged his gavel. "Mrs. Sarah Mitchell and her children are free from all obligations to Howard Blackwell. This case is closed." The courtroom exploded. People cheered. Some cried. Sarah heard none of it. She turned to Jim and buried her face in his chest and sobbed. "It is over," Jim whispered into her hair. "You are free. They are all free." Father O'Brien embraced them both. Anna Weber wept openly. Thomas Creek smiled for the first time anyone could remember. Grace stood frozen for a moment, then ran to her mother. "We won," she said in disbelief. "Mama, we won. We won, baby. We won." Outside the courthouse, Howard Blackwell climbed into his carriage. Marshal Dixon approached him. "Howard, I need to ask you some questions about those other contracts." Blackwell looked at him with pure hatred. "You are all traitors. Every one of you. This is not over. I will appeal. I will fight this." "You do that," Dixon said. "But while you are fighting, you will not go near Mrs. Mitchell or her children. If you do, I will arrest you. And this time no amount of money will get you out." Blackwell said nothing. He signaled his driver, and the carriage pulled away. That evening, they gathered at the ranch. Sarah cooked dinner, while Jim sat with his leg elevated. Grace helped. Samuel set the table. Lily sang and danced, celebrating in the way only a 4-year-old could. Father O'Brien joined them, along with Dutch and Anna and Thomas. They ate together, this collection of broken people who had fought back and won. After dinner, Jim asked Sarah to walk with him. They went slowly, Jim leaning on a crutch out to the hill where Mary and Emma rested. "I wanted to tell them," he said, "about the victory, about you, about everything." Sarah stood beside him, looking at the crosses. What would Mary say? She would say, "I told you so." She would say, "Love does not run out." She would say, "I deserve to be happy again." He turned to Sarah, and she would tell me not to waste any more time. Jim knelt awkward with his injured ankle. Sarah's breath caught. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, "I am not good with words. I am not romantic. I cannot promise you riches or ease or a life without struggle, but I can promise you this. I will protect you and your children with everything I have. I will work every day to build something lasting. I will respect you and honor you and stand beside you no matter what comes. Will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Grace and Samuel and Lily? Will you let me love you the way you deserve?" Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, not caring about the snow or the cold. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." Jim pulled a ring from his pocket, simple silver, worn smooth. "This was Mary's. She made me promise to give it to someone worthy. You are worthy." He slipped it onto Sarah's finger. It fit perfectly. They kissed there on the hill between the graves of the past and the promise of the future. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was crying. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." Behind them, 3 children watched from the house window. Grace smiled. Samuel clapped silently. Lily jumped up and down. Their family, broken and rebuilt, was finally whole. Spring came to Montana in a rush of green and gold. The snow melted in torrents, filling the creek until it sang. Wildflowers pushed through the mud, carpeting the hills in purple and yellow. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and on the hill behind the ranch, 2 fresh crosses stood beside the old ones, marking not death, but renewal. Sarah had planted them herself. 2 wooden crosses with no names, just dates. The day she signed Blackwell's contract. The day Jim cut the collar from her neck. Markers of the life that had ended and the one that began. It was March 23rd, 1879. 3 months since the trial. 2 months since Jim's ankle had healed enough to walk without a crutch. And today was the day everything changed again. Father O'Brien arrived at noon in his Sunday vestments. Behind him came Clara Murphy from the general store, Dutch Holloway, and his wife Anna Weber. Thomas Creek and a dozen other families from Billings. People who had watched Sarah stand trial and win. People who wanted to witness what came next. The wedding would be small. Not in a church, but here on the land that had become home. Under the cottonwood tree Jim had planted the week Sarah arrived already, showing its first buds. Grace emerged from the house first. She wore a dress of blue cloth, the fabric Jim had bought that first week, now sewn into something beautiful. Her hair was braided with wildflowers. She carried a basket of petals to scatter. Samuel followed solemn in a borrowed suit that was too large for him. He walked slowly, carefully carrying the rings on a small pillow. He had not stopped talking since the trial, making up for 8 months of silence with a flood of words. But today he was quiet again. Not from fear or trauma, from reverence. Lily bounced beside them in a white dress, giggling and waving to everyone. She had no concept of ceremony, only joy. Then Sarah appeared. She wore Mary's wedding dress. Jim had offered it hesitantly, afraid it might be too much too soon. But Sarah had taken the dress from the trunk, where it had lain folded for 2 years, and held it to her chest. "She would want this," Sarah had said. "She would want you to be happy, and she would want me to honor what she meant to you." The dress fit perfectly. Simple white cotton with lace at the collar. Nothing fancy. But on Sarah it looked like the finest silk. Jim stood under the cottonwood tree in his best suit, the one he had worn to marry Mary 8 years ago. His hair was trimmed, his face was clean-shaven. His hands shook slightly as Sarah walked toward him. Dutch stood beside him as witness. Grace and Samuel and Lily arranged themselves on Sarah's side. Father O'Brien opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved," the priest began. His voice carried across the yard strong and sure. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of James Brennan and Sarah Mitchell. Not just a union of 2 people, but of 2 families, 2 histories of loss, becoming one future of hope." He looked at Jim. "James, you came to me 3 months ago and asked if God could forgive a man for loving again after loss. I told you then what I tell you now. Love is not betrayal. Love is the greatest gift we can give or receive. Mary knew that. She would rejoice to see you here today." Jim's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Father O'Brien turned to Sarah. "Sarah, you have walked through fire and emerged stronger. You have fought for your children and won. You have learned that trust once broken can be rebuilt. Are you ready to build a life with this man?" "I am," Sarah said. Her voice did not waver. "James, do you take Sarah to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and health, in prosperity and hardship, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jim said. "And do you accept Grace, Samuel, and Lily as your children, to raise and protect and love as if they were born to you?" Jim looked at the 3 children. Grace stood tall, tears streaming down her face. Samuel smiled small and private. Lily waved. "I do," Jim said, "with everything I am. Sarah, do you take James to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and health, in prosperity and hardship, as long as you both shall live?" I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and the grace of God, I pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride." Jim stepped forward and took Sarah's face in both hands. He kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious that might break. When they parted, the gathering erupted in applause. Lily ran forward and hugged them both. Samuel and Grace joined, creating a knot of arms and joy. Father O'Brien smiled and closed his Bible. They celebrated with a meal spread on tables under the trees, roasted chicken and fresh bread, and the first strawberries of spring. Clara had made a cake, lopsided, but delicious. Anna brought preserves. Dutch contributed a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. As the sun began to set, Jim stood and raised his glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he said. His voice was quiet, but everyone stopped to listen. 3 months ago, I was a man waiting to die, alone, purposeless. Then God or fate or simple chance brought Sarah and her children to me. They gave me a reason to wake up, a reason to fight, a reason to live. He looked at Sarah. "You saved me as much as I saved you, maybe more. And I promise for as long as I breathe, I will make sure you never regret trusting me." He turned to the children. "Grace, you are the bravest person I know. Samuel, you have a strength that humbles me. Lily, you have a joy that lights up every dark corner. You are my children now, not by blood but by choice, and that makes you mine in every way that matters." Grace stood and walked to Jim. She wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face to his chest. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered. It was the first time she had called him that. Jim closed his eyes and held her tight. As darkness fell, the guests began to leave. Promises to visit, invitations to dinner, handshakes and hugs and blessings. Finally, only the new family remained. Sarah put the children to bed in the house that was now officially theirs. Grace in the small room Jim had added working through the winter despite his injury. Samuel and Lily together in the main room, their beds separated by a curtain for privacy as Samuel grew older. When they were settled, Sarah found Jim on the porch. He sat in the chair he had built, looking out at the land that stretched dark and peaceful under the stars. She sat beside him. He took her hand without looking. "Strange, is it not?" he said. "How fast life can change. 4 months ago, you were on an auction block. Now you are my wife." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked. "Happier than I thought I could ever be again." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence. An owl called from the barn. The creek murmured in the distance. Inside, Lily sang herself to sleep with a tuneless melody. "Jim," Sarah said after a while, "what happened to Blackwell? I heard rumors, but nothing certain." The territorial attorney found evidence of fraud in 11 other contracts. Blackwell was indicted. He fled to San Francisco rather than face trial. His property here was seized to compensate the people he cheated. Anna got her farm back. Thomas got money for his injuries. Others got what they were owed. And his ranch being divided and sold. Dutch is buying some of the land. So am I. Another 50 acres to add to what we have. We will need it as the family grows. Sarah looked at him. "Grows?" Jim smiled. 3 children need space. And maybe, if we are blessed, there will be more someday. Sarah thought about that. About a child that would be both hers and Jim's. A symbol of their new life together. "I would like that," she said softly. Spring turned to summer. The ranch thrived. Grace learned to ride and helped Jim with the cattle. Samuel discovered a talent for fixing things, spending hours in the barn repairing tools and equipment. Lily grew like a weed, her laughter a constant soundtrack to their days. In July, Jim hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. One was a young man from Ohio looking for a fresh start. The other was a widow from Billings who needed work. Jim paid them fair wages and treated them with respect. Word spread. The Brennan Ranch became known as a good place to work, a place where people were valued. Sarah kept the books and managed the household. She also started a small garden that grew into a large one. Vegetables, herbs, flowers. She sold the surplus in town, adding to their income. For the first time in her life, she had money of her own. Jim insisted she keep it separate, something that was only hers. "You are not my property," he told her. "You are my partner. What you earn is yours." It was a small thing, but it meant everything. In September, Grace started school in Billings. Sarah worried she would be treated differently, that the other children would remember the trial and the collar and the shame. But Grace returned home the first day with stories of new friends and a teacher who praised her handwriting. "They do not care about before," Grace reported. "They only care about now." Samuel joined her the following week. He was shy at first, but his quick mind and gentle nature won over his classmates. By October, he had 2 close friends and a growing confidence. Lily was too young for school, but begged to go anyway. Jim solved the problem by teaching her letters in the evening, sitting with her at the table while she traced ABCs on a slate board. She was reading simple words by Christmas. That winter was gentler than the last. They were prepared this time. Wood stacked high, food stored, animals sheltered. They spent long evenings by the fire reading or talking or simply being together. On Christmas morning, Jim gave each child a gift. For Grace, a journal bound in leather. "Write your own story now," he said. "Not what others did to you, but what you choose for yourself." For Samuel, a set of tools. Build things, fix things, create things. You have good hands. Use them. For Lily, a wooden horse he had carved over months of secret work. Painted white with a real horsehair mane. She named it Snow and carried it everywhere. For Sarah, a deed. She looked at it confused until she read the words. The ranch, all 250 acres, was now in both their names. Joint ownership, equal partners. "It is ours," Jim said. "Not mine. Ours. If something happens to me, you will never be vulnerable again. The land is yours and the children's. No one can take it." Sarah could not speak. She simply held the deed and cried. They made love that night for the first time, as husband and wife, gentle and careful, and full of wonder. Afterward, Sarah lay in Jim's arms and listened to his heartbeat. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she whispered. "Safe, loved, home." "Neither did I," Jim said. "But here we are." In March of 1880, exactly 1 year after the wedding, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Jim on the hill by the crosses, her hands trembling as she placed his palm against her still, flat belly. He stared at her, speechless, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to where their child grew. "Hello," he whispered to the life inside her. "I am your papa, and I promise I will love you and protect you and teach you to be kind." Grace was the first of the children to know. She hugged Sarah and cried happy tears. "A brother or sister," she said in wonder. "A real one. Ours." Samuel asked if the baby would like to fix things. Lily declared she would teach the baby to sing. The house filled with plans and joy and hope. She told Jim on the hill by the crosses. He stared at her, speechless, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat belly. "Hello," he whispered to the child growing inside her. "I am your papa, and I promise I will love you and protect you and teach you to be kind." The baby was born in November, a boy healthy and strong with Sarah's dark hair and Jim's gray eyes. They named him Robert James Brennan. Robert for the father who died, James for the father who raised him. Grace held him first after Sarah, her face full of wonder. "He is so small." "You were smaller," Sarah said. "Will he know about Blackwell and the collar and all of it? When he is old enough, we will tell him. We will tell him how we fought and how we won, how we built this family from broken pieces. He will know where he comes from, and he will be proud." Samuel touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "I will teach him to fix things." Lily kissed his forehead. "I will teach him to be happy." Jim stood back, watching his family, this impossible collection of people who had found each other in the darkest moments and built something beautiful. 2 years later, in the spring of 1882, Sarah stood on the porch watching her children play. Grace was 16 now, beautiful and strong, and talking about becoming a teacher. Samuel was 12, quiet but confident already, helping run the ranch. Lily was 8, wild and joyful and full of endless questions. And Robert, now 18 months old, toddled between them, laughing as they chased him in circles. Jim came up behind Sarah and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, his steady presence. "Look at what we built," she said softly. "Look at what you survived," Jim corrected. "I just helped." "We helped each other." They stood together as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal. Below them, the creek sang its endless song, and here on this small piece of land in the middle of Montana, a family thrived. Not a family born of blood, though blood now tied some of them, but a family born of choice, of promises kept, of love that refused to die even when the world tried to kill it. Sarah thought of the auction block in Billings, of the iron collar that had marked her neck, of the desperation and fear and absolute certainty that there was no way out. And she thought of the man who had stepped forward and said 3 simple words, "I can pay." But what he really said was, "I can love. I can protect. I can build something better." And he had. They all had. "What are you thinking?" Jim asked. Sarah turned in his arms and looked at his face. Older now, more lines around the eyes, gray threading through his hair, but still the same man who had rescued her, who had fought for her, who had promised she would be safe and kept that promise every single day. "I am thinking," she said, "that some families are built with blood, and some are built with choice, and ours is both, and that makes us unbreakable." Jim kissed her forehead. "Unbreakable," he agreed. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Jim and Sarah walked up to the hill one last time. They stood before the 4 crosses, Mary and Emma, and the 2 newer ones marking the death of their old lives. "Thank you," Jim said to the graves, "for letting me go, for letting me love again, for understanding." Sarah added her own silent prayer. To Robert, who had given her 3 beautiful children, to Mary, who had loved Jim enough to want him happy even after she was gone. Some promises, Sarah had learned, were worth everything it cost to keep them. And the promise Jim had made that day in Billings, the promise to carry them all, had been kept. Not just carried through one crisis, but carried through life, through joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, loss and rebirth. He had carried them all, and in return they had carried him. That, Sarah thought as she closed the door behind them, was what family meant. Not who was strongest, but who refused to let go. And they would never ever let go. The end.